A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in the Chequamegon National Forest in northern Wisconsin. After our experience there, we do not plan on returning unless we go with a large group of people. We are originally from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin is our go-to place for a getaway. We've done a number of hiking trips in this area, but never to this particular region. We are by no means backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been hiking and exploring whenever we can find the time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in the solitude of nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike in a remote section of the North Country Trail. It's a very scenic path, much like what you would find in the Appalachians, although it is much lesser known. Some parts of the trail are very remote, and the only access is by logging roads. We had planned to hike for 15 miles along the trail until we got to a backpack shelter. We would set up camp around there. We spent the night at a friend's house in Wausau and set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest, we were captivated by the natural beauty of the thick, green forest. I drove slowly along the gravel roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving, we passed a couple of men standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, beat-up pickup truck, complete with a Confederate bumper sticker. As we passed, I gave a friendly wave, and they just stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. As we passed them by, I looked in my rearview mirror and noticed that they were still staring at us through the haze of the road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we didn't think anything of this encounter. Aside from those guys, we did not see anyone else on the remote logging roads. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later. There was no one else parked next to it. A perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our backpacks and set off down the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and flies at bay. We took pictures along the way and marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. That's a collection of debris left behind by ice sheets for those who don't know. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter's fire pit and boiled water for our trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars were out in the night sky. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures that we had taken that day. But after lugging around a heavy backpack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. Whenever we camped at state or national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but on this night, there were no RVs or other campers making noise, so I closed my eyes and allowed the sounds of the forest to lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night. She usually has some apprehension about sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when she drifted off to sleep, but we awoke sometime later to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, we heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were now wide awake at this point. We lay silently in our tent when we heard the noise again. The tent we were using that night had no windows, We could only guess as to what was making the noise outside. We initially thought it had been an animal who had gotten into our leftover food or the garbage bag at the shelter, but the noise was too distinct. It did not sound like the rustling of food wrappers or the shifting of camping equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent sounds in the darkness. We were unarmed and scared shitless. We didn't know what to do in this situation. I normally carry bear mace on me, but I decided to leave it at home to save on the weight, against my girlfriend's wishes, a decision that was now coming back to haunt me. The sound continued as we remained as still as a grave. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the sound ceased, and we lay in complete silence, only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it, leaves rustling, followed by low voices. We couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like at least two people were conversing with each other in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, they did not seem to be getting closer. Whoever was out there had not spotted our tent or just decided to leave us alone. We sat there for the rest of that night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly exited the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was there, but I only saw the labyrinth of trees beyond the shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and put our tent away. Before leaving, we decided to check out the shelter one more time. When we got there, my girlfriend screamed. Near the entrance was the word "kill" carved into the shelter wall, and there were a number of deep cuts. I looked to the ground and noticed a fresh scattering of wood splinters. Someone had been heaving an axe or driving a knife into the wooden wall, and that's what we heard last night. We got the hell out of there, nearly jogging with all of our gear on as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and looking off into the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed through the glacial debris we had seen the day before, and we knew that we were getting close. We were quietly rejoicing to ourselves. We got back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck on the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw that there was blood smeared on the windshield, and a carcass of a squirrel was impaled on the wiper blade, with the hair and blood still stuck on the wiper and across the hood of the car. I didn't bother clearing it off. We threw our gear into the trunk and sped off down the gravel logging roads. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to the gas station by the nearest town, I removed the squirrel with a wad of newspaper and tried to remove as much dried blood from the car as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop until we made it back to Chicago. This was the last trip we ever took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. I live in a small town of about 11,000 people in Wisconsin. Not by preference. It's for a job. We will be moving when I can get a better one. One day, I was on my way to my employer's house for a meeting. He runs the company out of his basement until we can find an office space to rent. I look into my rearview mirror and saw that I was being tailgated by a mysterious blue car, driven by a Caucasian bald man. I drive a Kia Soul, which has a flat back end, so if I can't see your headlights, you are mere inches away from my rear bumper. The driver honked at me, I flipped him off and slowed down to 5 miles under the speed limit. There wasn't anyone behind him, so I wasn't ruining anyone else's day. He had plenty of chances to pass me, but didn't. After a few minutes with no other cars around, and him still kissing my bumper at 50 miles per hour, I grabbed my cell phone and pretended to turn around quickly and take a photo of his car, hoping that this would scare him off. I was in the country with no other cars around, and this guy was giving me some bad vibes. I came to an intersection where I'd have to make a right turn, but I decided to see if this man would follow me and made a left turn instead. And of course, he followed. I then came to a roundabout and thought I would lose him there. I traveled the entire thing twice. He stayed on me the whole way. At this point, I knew he was messing with me, trying to get under my skin. Well, I decided to allow myself to be late for my meeting and began to drive to the local police station. He tailed me the whole way there. I pulled up and parked, ready to run inside. I thought he would just leave once he saw where we were. But no, he parked right next to me and just stared at me. He pulled up so close to my car that I would have had a hard time opening my car door all the way. The driver had to be in his 40s, wearing sunglasses, and had a creepy smile. He was wearing fairly neat clothes, and the interior of his car looked pristine. I was checking to see if he had a gun. I should mention here that I'm in training to be a behavior analyst, and while I only work with kids right now, my hobby is criminal psychology and profiling, and I was seriously trying to get a read on this guy. A few seconds went by, and I grabbed my phone again. This time I intended on calling 911 from the police station parking lot. As I dialed, the driver rolled his window down, still not saying anything. After staring at me for a while longer, he rolled his window back up, slowly backed out of his parking spot, and left. As soon as he was gone, I ran inside and told a police officer what happened. Unfortunately, I was too focused on not crashing to get a plate number. Apparently, there had been lots of complaints about tailgaters recently, with multiple reports of a man driving a blue car. I filled out a report with the officer, and he gave me a card for victim services and the address to a local women's shelter, just in case I was followed home one night. But I live in a secure apartment building with my fiancé. After I was done, I went back out to my car and noticed there was a note on the windshield. All it had on it was a smiley face. I took it back inside and showed the officer I just spoke with. "Wow, that's disturbing. You shouldn't go anywhere alone for a while. I'm going to call you later to check in on you." He did end up calling me twice, and said he was patrolling the parking lot of my apartment complex during his night shift. This is a small town, and the relationship with law enforcement is more communal than in the big cities. I felt safe knowing that someone with a badge had my back. If I ever see the man in the blue car again, no question, I will call the police and lead him straight to the station again if I can. As a precaution, I told my fiancé that I will post my work schedule, or if I had to leave for another reason, and said that if I didn't text him within 10 minutes of my estimated time of arrival, to call the police right away. My Uncle Sam told me this story the last time he was in town. Growing up, my uncle has always been the family joker. He was always pulling pranks and would fill the house with his bellowing laughter. I don't think I ever viewed him as a serious person before he told me of this experience. He was really into cars and asked to see my new Infiniti G37 sedan. So I took him out to the driveway and showed him the car with my dad. We did the usual pop the hood and rev the engine kind of stuff. And we all pretended that we knew what we were looking at as we stared into the engine well. That's when Sam wanted to tell us about something that happened to him back in his college days. He said that it would be a good lesson for me. This is honestly the first time I ever heard him speak in a very serious tone. There was also a hint of fear in his voice. He started out by saying that he had never told anyone about this before, but after seeing me with my new car, and the fact that I was a young guy, made him want to share this. Uncle Sam attended a small college in an isolated farming community of Wisconsin. The campus was in a town of about 10,000 people. Most were students or worked at the college, but there were some locals as well. He moved off campus during his junior year and into a new place with some friends about 3 miles outside of town. One night, after having quite a few beers with his friends, he decided that he better walk home since he had an exam the following morning, and he didn't live far from the tavern. As he made his way down the dark country road, with cornfields on either side, a man in a beat-up pickup truck pulled up next to him. The driver appeared to be a farmer. "Hey there, fella. You want a lift?" Sam, being intoxicated and not thinking straight, took him up on his offer. He got in the front passenger seat and they took off. He gave the man directions to the house he lived in with his college buddies, and then about 5 minutes into the drive, he noticed that the man had gone past the turn they needed to take. He informed the man that his house was behind them and they would need to turn around. "Oh, I've lived around these parts for 50 years now. I know a shortcut to where you're staying. Pay attention so you can remember it." That's when Sam started to get suspicious. The potential danger he was in sobered him up real quick. The farmer eventually pulled into a dirt driveway that led up to an old farm that appeared to be falling apart. There was a very old playground set in the front yard, with a shed in the back of the property that looked like it had lights on. The rest of the property was shrouded in darkness, the only illumination coming from the headlights of the pickup truck and the glow of the moon. My uncle's plan was to bolt the second the man slowed down enough. So when the farmer came to a stop, my uncle tried to push up on the lock knob, hoping the door would open. However, the top of the knob had been sawed off, meaning that he wouldn't be able to unlock it manually. At this point, he knew he was trapped. Uncle Sam then abruptly ended the story with, "I fought the man off and sprinted back home. So if you ever plan on doing some drinking with your friends, always make sure you have a designated driver to take you back home. Now, let's go inside." I don't think my uncle wanted to admit it, but something very bad happened to him out at that farm. I could tell by the look in his eyes that whatever happened has haunted him for many years. I'll be taking his advice to heart and will never accept rides from strangers.